Hello everybody, this is Storm Hughes. Welcome to my talk on game design, how to steal fun, an applied perspective on game design, by me, Storm Hughes. Who am I? I'm an organizer here at Society of Play. I am a programmer at AgroCrab Games, and I use they, them pronouns. I joined Society of Play in 2016. I have been making games professionally since 2020, and have always been a bit of a philosophy enjoyer, as a bit of a warning. On the topic of warnings, this talk features a JPEG of a gun pointed at the camera. It is used entirely for comedic effect, and no viewers will be harmed in the process of watching this talk. So, let's get into it. When I started making games, I felt limited to what I could make because I was limited to what I could steal. Often online, we are advised to directly take things from games that we like and implement them for ourselves. It was easy to steal objects, but it was harder to steal concepts. An example being that we could steal stuff like guns and bullets. We could shoot those guns and bullets. We could shoot at people with those guns and bullets, or even be shot at by those guns and bullets. We could even steal the first-person view. Implementation is easy, and when we're done, we have a game. But enough is never enough, so we go back and we take more. This time with a bit more skill, we take the UI. We take level design, we take items and health and stamina and so on. We implement them to actualize our goals of making a game. But for me, it was never enough because what I wanted to do was steal the fun. So to do this, we have to do a bit of recon. This is the perceptual field, a graphic taken from Game Feel by Steve Swink. It maps the interactive nature between the player and the system. The fun exists in the minds of the players, and we can't really steal that. But our entire working domain is on this side of the graph. Like a body to DNA, the fun is expressed in the player, but its origins are in the system. And as a bit of a warning, I'm going to be referring to the games that we craft as the system. This includes assets, sounds, logic, code, mechanics, everything that we make in hopes of producing fun. I'm intentionally doing this. I'm abstracting the concept of a game to a network of system interactions between elements and players. I'm doing this to strip it of its usual context by changing my language. If we want to steal ideas, we need our concept goggles. If we have our object goggles, we're only going to see objects. So, if we're making an FPS game, we could steal the things that we see FPS games have, and we will be left with a room with enemies shooting at you, and you shoot back at them, and that is a video game. In fact, we could steal every object from Halo, all the guns, animations, 3D models, and sounds, but how do we ensure that they're fun to interact with? I would ask, well, what does the player see? A player does not just see the system, they see the system over time. We can use a state perspective to understand this, a state being defined as a particular condition that something is in at a specific time, where each state of the system is characterized by a combination of feedback elements and system values. We use state machines and bespoke methods to construct a system. Players make up game states based on system feedback. Game states belong to the player in the player's mind, and system states belong to the system in the system. But in the minds of players, a game is a series of game states that are seen, understood, and interacted with. And that interaction sparks a systemic reaction, and this should draw their attention. But because humans are tricky, players cannot help but imagine potential game states. What if everything goes wrong? Some of those alt futures are better than others, and hopefully at least one of those is our goal. A goal state being defined as the future game state that the player is actively attempting to steer their experience into. I suspect if a player is not creating and actualizing goal states, there are design elements that we can emphasize to either lead players or direct game states. So, yeah, it's pretty simple. A room full of guns and targets isn't fun because players are not actualizing goal states. But how do we make sure that they're actualizing goal states? That's with game design. Like taking 2D slices from a 3D cube, we need to look at specific aspects of our system and all of its many intersections with every other aspect of our system. A system has many bespoke elements with many connections between them, and how we choose to see and understand those can really reveal the magic and take us one step closer to our fun theft. But how does this actually work? To understand this, we should take our perspective for a little bit of test drive and get back to our task on hand. How do we force the players to make and actualize goal states? By Storm Hughes. I would try it at gunpoint. I mean, we have the guns, so might as well use them. So step one, establish a neutral game state. In reality, states are always changing. Time and entropy are always approaching, and there is nothing you can do about it. In reality, the system can never really be stable, and there is no peace. But in games, the world can be stabilized. Games are low-resolution simulations of reality, and because of this, you or a loved one can enjoy systemic peace. All anxieties could be alleviated by feedback systems, and ensure success is known. And that kind of sounds nice. Could you imagine if you knew you were okay? Step 2, introduce change that threatens the game state. Players are spooked by our peace deprivation and should yearn for its return. And if given the agency, they should seek out peace once again. As a warning, this might include not playing your game at all. Some players, though, find a sense of pride in their ability to stabilize the game state, or even seek out future unstable game states, like surfing systemic chaos and overpowering it with their skills. So, it seems pretty simple. You just got to hold a gun to their head. But checking our perceptual field here, where is the gun? Yeah, that didn't do anything. You see, the system needs leverage. Feedback elements are essential. Visuals for guns, bullets, sound effects, muzzle flashes are all needed to communicate, but there has to be an actual metaphorical bullet in our metaphorical gun for the threat to hold any weight. It's all fun and games until somebody dies. So, if the gun is made of systemic consequences, all we have to do is look for some in the games that we steal from. In Halo, enemies killing the player is bad, and the game will reset to a different state if you cannot stay alive. So, let's just steal that. And what do we get? Yeah, you get dead players. Now that failure is possible and players are aware, how do we ensure that it generates fun? Like, what is so fun about dying? Yet nothing, really. Other than liking failure as a personal quirk, players should succeed in their quest of actualizing goal states. Guns are too direct of a metaphor and not subtle enough to motivate players. This does not mean we will not be threatening them with guns. We don't need a gun. We need a gun engine. You see, luckily for us, though, we stole death. We did not make it from scratch. But we didn't simulate it. We quantified it, with a number. And numbers are tricky over time. You see, stealing death and implementing health might seem like a simple one-dimensional action. Health is 100, and if hit with bullet, lose health, and if health below 0, die, and if dead, restart. But what we've done is that we've stolen a machine that restructures the dynamic of the player to the system, and our unawareness of the function of this machine leaves us with unused systemic force that could propel players through our shooters. How do we do this, though? We already stole and added the health. Resource management, an aspect of game design. By Storm Hughes. So some values within a system are needed to be either cognizant of or interacted with, and this interaction will instigate a reaction. But, using our philosophy, some things are and some things are mine. And the byproduct of this is that we now have resources and simulation values. Both are values within the system and they both do things, but some are the players and some are the worlds. It kind of splits down the perceptual field, but not so specifically. Pulling up this classic image here, you can see that the health is the resource, the enemies are a simulation, and your gun is the management. Yes, enemies have health, and yes, you are changing that number, but players are doing so for a reason, and it's to manage their own health. While it's written in the system that a value of health being low is bad, players will now consider their health in future game states. Ideally, they desire their health to be high in order to succeed. Players now consider their health over time. Their health has velocity. You see, numbers and time have a bit of a tricky relationship. Any given value can be broken into 3 aspects: its position, its velocity, or its acceleration. So this means that a health position could tell me how much room I have to play with. My health velocity could tell me how bad it's been. And the health acceleration tells me how I feel right now within a very specific state. Being shot lowers your health directly, but enemies don't shoot you constantly. And the more enemies on screen actively shooting at you effectively lowers the velocity of your health. Using this, we could look at it like this. With the health value of 50 of 100, but a negative 20 velocity and a negative 10 acceleration, we know that we are not doing well and it's getting worse actively right now. But with the same position and no velocity or acceleration, we could be doing better, but as of right now, we are perfectly safe. Low health with no velocity or acceleration might lead a player to think I should go find some health, where low health but high positive velocity and acceleration, as long as things don't get bad, I'm okay. I don't need to heal. I am healing. So the player interacts with these three aspects constantly. And in a given combat loop, the system isn't explicitly lowering the velocity of health as far as the player perceives the current game state is risking their goal state. The player is not already dead, but they will be if the velocity remains the same, and they look around to see the systemic cause of this velocity change, and they wish to correct it. Our health gun is now creating more subtle effects in the mind, more than, oh gee, I hope I don't die. So, what did we learn? One cannot simply increase the velocity of their health. They take actions to change these values. Player dying, player kill enemies, player stop dying. Players can take actions to change simulation values, but they're not managing the simulation value. They're managing their own resources indirectly by engaging with simulation values. Okay, but why does our basic shooter not make the fun? We already stole the gun engine. But we didn't steal the engine part. We didn't know it was an engine, and we left a bunch of parts behind. We need to steal the resource management. So, looking at our Halo example of a combat loop, Halo has a lot more resources to work with, but it also has a lot more interplay between the resources dynamics with the game state. As an example, Halo has shield, which, as long as the velocity of the incoming damage remains low enough for a long enough time, your shield will regenerate. This sets a systemic rhythm for players to sort of attune to, and this rhythm is when am I safe and when am I not safe. This simulates combat bravery while communicating when to be risky and when to be safe, and this gives them a space to play around with tactics. But Halo is a more robust system, and we can't just take the resource, we have to also take the systemic pressures on that resource. As an example, Halo has these guys, our jackals. With our enemy design, different enemies apply different kinds of systemic forces on players. Low damage enemies with low accuracy push the player around the arena, while high damage enemies and high accuracy just block off areas entirely. And players need to make choices as to which systemic pressures to neutralize first. Given this crude example, a lot of grunts that are near the player, missing constantly, are annoying but manageable. But these high damage enemies in the back line who do not move are a problem. Finding a space to heal while actively positioning yourself to target specific enemies forces the player to construct a priority list of systemic pressures, and it's only possible because of the subtle effects of resource management on the player. So now, knowing all of this, you can go make Halo. But does this make Halo a tycoon game? I didn't invent resource management just now, and it's a whole genre. Revealing that resource management is an underlying systemic force in Halo doesn't make it an RTS game or a simulation game. But how is it different than a real-time strategy game? The only change here is complexity or resource dependency, right? There's just more kinds of health and fancy monies. It's not about having material or having the resource. In StarCraft, at higher levels of play, skilled players must hit certain velocities at certain times within a match to construct the economy needed to generate the resources required to construct the army formations needed. In Halo, we only really care about the position of our resource and detecting systemic forces on them. In StarCraft, we are managing a resource's position versus its velocity reality, and that sub-management or micromanagement sets this apart. The management of not just a resource value, but of its parts, of its position versus its velocity versus its acceleration. We haven't even talked about acceleration. Clicker games are a subgenre of resource simulation that focus heavily on the resource acceleration. The goal is not to have a high value or to have a high velocity. The goal is to increase your velocity, making resource acquisition even faster. And the more time not accelerating, the more time players perceive is left on the table. This can trick players into feeling successful by having high number, even though the goal is to always have a higher number. This has been a lot. So to summarize, systems are complicated, and we need to construct specific frameworks of design to better comprehend and manipulate the systems that we create to derive the fun that we want. And doing so can reveal the dynamics at play and allow us to more confidently implement features. Numbers over time have complicated relationships with users, and their relationships to each other combine in the mind to have compound effects. Understanding this grants us the ability to impact players in very subtle ways. But remember, players do not study systems the way that we do, and if prompted, they may attribute elements of their experience to what they can see. Feedback elements can overpower the reality of numbers, and numbers can overpower the effects of feedback elements. And we can choose to ignore this, but there may be consequences. Just because a gun does higher damage numbers doesn't mean players know it's stronger. If a sound effect is bassy enough and there's enough feedback elements to convey that a gun is stronger, players may truly believe that a gun is stronger. And knowing why helps us steal why, and this brings us closer to stealing the fun. Hopefully, this has provided an example of how to go about finding the why.